Okay, now we're going to take a look at preview upcoming attractions with Paul. You've seen enough of the videos now with Moses and Isaiah. In order to introduce Daniel, I'm going back to Paul because I want you to understand where Daniel is by means of Paul, because Paul is playing Daniel in Ephesians. His book of Ephesians is basically tagged to two rhetorical devices. Okay, the first is Jewish and the second is Greek. The first Jewish device that he's tagging to is Daniel. He's patterning Ephesians after Daniel 9. He's explaining how Daniel 9 is going to play now that church exists. That's the whole point of his book. Alright? So you have to know God's orchestration of time doctrine in order to get what he's saying, in order to follow the flow of his book. And Ephesians 1, unfortunately, has a really bad translation in verse 11. If you look in the middle of the screen toward the right, you'll see an orange 49, okay, which is just above this little thing here. I just right here, see just above the line here where I'm moving it, see the orange 49? Because I don't want to touch it. If I touch the 49, this thing will disappear. See, orange 49, see I covered it up now, okay. So, see where it says Temple Showbread Plan? That's the proper translation of the Greek word at the left of Temple Showbread Plan. See where the 301 is, the little blue 301? The Greek word just before that is called protesin. Protesin means temple showbread. He's talking about the temple. That's why the temple is brought up in chapter 2, the second wall being church. Because he's first, through the meter, introducing the concepts that were in Daniel 9. He's reminding the reader of them by means of the meter, which means the readers knew the meter of Daniel 9. He's using the meter of Daniel 9, and it's due to the meter of Daniel 9 that God replies the way he does in Daniel 9:24 and 25. God is taking Daniel's own meter in order to make those numbers we see in English. Of course, in English, if you didn't know this, those numbers come out of thin air. We don't know where they come from. 77s have been decreed for your people. First of all, everybody gets it wrong and they think it's 70 weeks. No, it's sevens. But see, if you don't know the meter, you don't know that. Paul knows the meter. So, we're going to have a little introduction here, just preview of coming attractions, to how Paul is using the meter. All right? And, you know, hopefully you're watching this full screen in HD, because I got to get this all on one page so you can see the panoramic picture. Now, if you look in the upper left-hand corner, okay, about the middle of the screen, you're going to see before him by his standard. That's in about the upper left, about maybe a third down the screen. And you see a little blue 84, and you see a C in pink. I had to make these all different colors. That's the footnote, C. And then at the right of that, you see an orange 7. It's the only 7 on the left-hand side of the screen, the page on the left-hand side of the screen. That 84 is equal to the syllable number. Paul's using an indexing system, and I got to tell you this now because Daniel's going to do the same thing, and it's a lot more sophisticated than Daniel. Paul is using an indexing system to index you, to remind you of the syllable count at the end of Psalm 90, verse 4, which is 84 syllables. Now that's important because Psalm 90, verse 4, is the famous, a day is 1,000 years is as a day to God. But the whole cumulative total syllables started at verse 1 in Psalm 90. And the whole thing is God the actor talking. Moses basically talking for him. All right? And as hopefully you've seen by now, Isaiah splits that 84 syllables into two sections of 42. That's how we know how to interpret Psalm 90. And Isaiah had begun it at Isaiah 52:13 and 52:13 and 14. That was 42 syllables. And then he encloses it at the end in Isaiah 53:12, which is also 42 syllables. So Paul is playing on Psalm 90 just like Isaiah did, except notice the pregnancy of this. It's in yellow highlighted. It's the fourth clause in Ephesians 1:4 in the upper third left of the screen. And the English translation, if you can't read the Greek, which is katanopionautu. The English, which I've translated to match the meter, is before him by his standard. Paul is talking about the millennium at that point. I'm going to go through that in more detail later. Just understand now that that's what Paul means by the statement he's making in that clause. Because just before it, in the blue, where you see B and D in pink, and you see a 77 in blue, little 77 superscript, where it says in English, we are pronounced to be holy and blameless, and that's 21 syllables. 77 is when Paul was expecting the millennium to begin. Okay? So at 84, obviously the millennium has been going on since the beginning of that clause. And we would be perfect and holy and blameless by his standard. We're back on earth with Christ ruling. We're perfect then. Church is perfect at that point. So you see, Paul is tagging the millennial verse in Psalm 90, which all the Jews know talk about that future 1,000 years. Okay, it's really 1,050, but they call it 1,000, and that's okay. It means that millennium. So, all the people who are amillennial, just throw them out. They can't read Bible. This proves them wrong immediately. Okay? So Paul is tagging to Psalm 90 verse 4 at the 84 syllable marker. They didn't have the Dewey Decimal System for organizing text. They didn't have chapters and verses. What they had were syllable counts because everybody memorized it orally. All right? So everybody knew, that's Psalm 90 verse 4. Because it's a very pregnant meaning that Isaiah played on and that Daniel also plays on, as we're going to see. The next place Paul marks is syllable 133. And syllable 133 is the yellow highlighting in the first clause of verse 6. The 6 is boxed in the left-hand side of your screen with a footnote E in pink that says in English, resulting in praise to the glory of his grace. And that whole clause that's highlighted in yellow that's not boxed is 28 syllables. Okay? And hopefully your brain is beginning to click on, if you've been watching my videos. 28, we saw that. We saw that a lot of times in Psalm 90, and we saw that a lot of times in Isaiah. Yeah, you did. And specifically, though, Paul is tagging to all of the syllables in Psalm 90 through the end of verse 7. Now that's really important because he's telling you how the content of Psalm 90 through verse 7 is being realized at the clause that he's talking about when he says, resulting in the praise to the glory of his grace. So that tells you, okay, well, I got to go look up Psalm 90. And I'm looking at it in Hebrew, and I'm going to, just quickly try to explain what it says. Psalm 90 verse 7 itself has been talking about, our life is futile and all that. But the verse itself in Psalm 90 verse 7, which ends at 133 syllables, says, because all of us are in your anger, and in your overflowing wrath we are consternated. That's a corrected translation, but your Bible will read similarly. Okay? So instead of that being true, because of the cross, we instead are resulting in praise to the glory of His grace. That's in the last highlighted yellow on the left-hand side of your screen, about halfway down the screen. Syllable is 28 for that paragraph. It's divisible by 7 in orange. You see how he's talking back to Psalm 90? By means of indexing at that cumulative syllable count. He's using meter to tell you where to look. Okay? You know, meter is like a fingerprint if you got enough of it. The occurrence of where that is, if he's already established what he's talking about, and you already know where he's going because we already had the 84. Now at 133 we're still in the same psalm. And he doesn't stop there either. So if you were a little confused or you weren't sure, then his next stop is syllable 175 in Psalm 90. Okay, well, syllable 175 is in the upper 1/3 right-hand side of your screen. Again, footnote E. Again, same syllable count for the paragraph, 28, in orange on the right-hand side of your screen in the upper 1/3 of it, where the English translation says, debt cancellation for our transgressions. That's a better translation than what you have. Effacing means debt cancellation, not just the forgiveness. It's usually translated forgiveness of our sins. It's really debt cancellation. The term originated as a gambling debt or some other kind of debt that you incurred, and somebody forgives the debt, forgives the money that you owe. That's where aphiemi came from. And effacing is the word that he's actually using in the verse. All right, so now we have to go look at, well, what is syllable 175 in Psalm 90? And it's in Psalm 90, verse 9. And again, I'm going to have to, quickly retranslate from the Hebrew because I'm looking at it in the Hebrew. Because all of our days turn in your anger. All of our years end with a sigh, a groaning sigh, actually. So instead of us having to say, all of our years are ending with a sigh, as Moses said in Psalm 90, Paul's saying, well, see, due to the cross, Ephesians 1:7, third clause, which is in the highlighted in yellow, in the upper right-hand side of the screen, it's debt cancellation. Phew, so we're still sighing, all right, but we're sighing with relief. See how he's playing on Moses? All of our years end with a sigh. That's how Psalm 90 verse 9 ends. But instead, we're sighing with relief because our transgressions, the debt owed God, is canceled because Christ paid that debt. You see how beautiful this is? The tracking device in the meter tells you exactly how to interpret what Paul is saying. And yeah, you can get the similar meaning out of it if you didn't know this. But look how much richer and more important it is. Especially since Psalm 90 is a psalm about time, which all the Jews know, even today. Okay? So there's an angle of interpretation to Ephesians 1:3-14 that all of us Christians are missing because we're too busy being bored with the technicalities of Scripture, and the teachers aren't teaching it. Okay? They're not teaching this. Why? Because the congregations don't care. I mean, my pastor's unlike anybody else I can find in that he spent 7 whopping years, 7 times a week, that's equivalent to every day of the week, he exegeted Ephesians. Every single class was exegesis on exegesis on exegesis. I have something like, 7, 8, 9 notebooks that are 3 inches thick, where he went through the Greek and he took you all over the Bible to show what Ephesians was talking about. My pastor didn't know about this meter, or if he did know, he didn't teach us. He didn't have time. So maybe there are other pastors out there who know this meter, but it's not being taught, baby. Because I can't find anybody who taught Ephesians for 7 whopping years, 7 times a week, each day and each time a new class, going through the exegesis over and over and over, starting in 1985. Okay? So this is not being known. This is not being taught. So we don't know the time connection in what Paul is saying. We don't know that it ties to Psalm 90. This is revolutionary stuff. But see how beautiful it is? Oh, we end our years with a sigh. See, that's Psalm 90, verse 9, which I am moving the cursor now, so it's highlighting in yellow. Oh, but instead we're sighing debt cancellation. For our transgressions. See? Isn't that beautiful? Isn't that meaningful? And it doesn't stop there, just in case you weren't quite sure that Psalm 90 was in view, even though he's tying out of the same concept of sighing. We got 238, syllable 238 in Psalm 90 is our next stop. And where is that? Uh-oh. Psalm 90, verse 12. You know what that one says? Limnot. Teach us to count our days. Why would Paul tie his syllable 238, which is in the middle of the screen on the right-hand side, which has a footnote in pink named F, which on the right-hand side, far right-hand side, in about a little over 1/3 down the page, has the orange number 63. 63. Does that ring a bell by now? 63. The number of years out of the 70 that was in Isaiah. And this is also going to tie to Isaiah, but I'll get to Isaiah in a minute. Syllable 238 in Psalm 90, verse 12. Teach us to count our days. That's where Paul is indexing. Yeah. And what is Paul saying in Ephesians 1:9, where the syllable 238 of his own occurs? Well, let's look at it. What did the paragraph say that he's ending at? Per the standard of the riches of his grace, with which grace he superabounds us, by means of what? All wisdom and reasoned thought. Phronese means reasoned thought. I'm not sure how your English Bibles translate it, but that's what it means. Making known, making known to us the past hidden content. Mysterion in Greek. I translate as past hidden content. Unfortunately, your English Bibles will mistranslate it as mystery. No, it's not a mystery. It means making known something that was a mystery to Moses. And Moses said, what? In Ephesians 9, Psalm 90, verse 12, teach us to count our days so that we may present to you a heart of wisdom. So what is Paul talking about in the very same paragraph? He's giving us the wisdom, making known to us past hidden content about his will and purpose according to his own delight, which delight he, Father, published in him, Christ. And Psalm 90 was saying, teach us to count our days. Yeah, and if you don't know that Paul is indexing the syllable 238 in Psalm 90, you don't know what kind of wisdom he's talking about. Counting the days. He's going to return to that theme again and again in Ephesians. Like Ephesians 5:16, redeeming the time. Why is he talking about that? Because he's been talking about time ever since Ephesians 1:3, which you would know if you would know that he was indexing this syllable 238 in Psalm 90:12, which says, teach us to count our days. Is this awesome or what? the days, redeeming the time. That's church's role, to redeem time. Okay, but we don't know the first thing about it. Yeah, because we don't know the meter. And as if that weren't enough, to make sure you understand, syllable 252. 252 is what? Psalm 90 verse 13. Well, what does Psalm 90 verse 13 say? Oh, Shuvu Yehovah, Shuvu Yehovah Matai. What does that mean? Return, O God. How long? Psalm 90 verse 13. How long until you return? And what is Paul saying in Ephesians 1 verse 10, first clause, at his own syllable 252? How long? As long as it takes to result in the filling up of time dispensation. It's in the middle right-hand section of your screen. Footnote G in pink. 14 in orange, just below the 63. Do you see it? Isokonomian to pleiromatos ton kairon. This is the Greek. In the best English translation, to meter it is to result in the filling up of time dispensation, because pleiromatos means a woman who is pregnant about to give birth. That's its origin. That's the kind of fullness it is. It came to mean, a ship being full of sailors or cargo about to disembark. And it also means a woman who's full of child. But the child isn't yet born. She's on the verge of. Paul always talks about pregnancy. To result in the filling up of time dispensation. And that ties to Galatians 4:4, which he had written earlier. And what is it that Psalm 90 verse 13 had said? Shoo, come back, God. How long? Yeah, and Paul's telling you how long. As long as it takes to fill up church. That's how long it's going to take. See, if you don't know the meter, you don't know what Paul means by what he says in this verse. And of course, it's mistranslated in English. Quasi-mistranslated. But do you see? You see, he's tracking. There's no way you could mistake, if you knew the meter, what he was talking about or where to. How do you think I learned it? And in case there was any doubt, let's go to what Paul's playing on in Isaiah 53. Isaiah 53, 77 syllables. Where have you seen that before? That's the cumulative number of syllables. See where I'm doing in the lower right-hand corner? Cumulative number of syllables in Isaiah 52:15. How many videos have you seen of mine now that shows that? What was 77? Oh, 77, well, see, that was the age of David when he died. That's why Isaiah is doing it that way. The first 77 syllables are about the first David, and the last 77 syllables, as indeed the whole thing, is about the last David. Yeah, and what's unique about the way Paul's doing this is 77 was the year that he expected the millennium to begin, because he's writing when Christ would have been 56, and so when Christ would have been 77, that should have been the end of the tribulation, because the temple should go down in 70 AD, which of course it did. And 7 years later, should have been, the tribulation had church matured in time. And of course, Paul is writing when the Lord would have been 56, which I'll cover more in a later video. So there were 21 years remaining to 77, and if you look in the left-hand side of your screen, in the upper third, in the blue highlighted section, where the footnote is B and D in pink, with a 21 in orange in the middle of the screen, sort of, almost. We are pronounced holy and blameless. Yeah, we would have been if church had finished. The tribulation would have been over. We would have been up there for 7 years, and the Bema would have ended. The judgment seat of Christ for us, getting our rewards and our decorations, which is what Revelation 1 through 3 was about, would be about. It hadn't yet been written. See, the tribulation would have been over. We would have been there for 7 years. We would be on our way back, so we have to get our rewards first. So that's why he's playing on 77, because the last David is risen now. So when the last David would have been 77, that was when Paul was expecting the millennium to begin, if church had matured. So that tied to Isaiah 52:15. And of course, syllable 133, which we just saw in Psalm 90, also ties in Isaiah. And this is why church has not yet, why the rapture has not yet happened. Paul is explaining in syllable 133 of his own, which we just sort of looked at, but we're going to look at it again. On the left-hand side of the screen, in the center, where you see the box 6 on the left-hand side, where you see the footnote in the middle, that's E in pink, and the blue number to the left of it is 133, and to the right of it says in English, resulting in praise to the glory of his grace, and it's 28 syllables in orange. That's time to Isaiah 53:2. What was Isaiah 53:2 about? Well, as you just saw, hopefully just saw, Isaiah was doing an annual chronology of Israel's future history, as well as telling us what would happen when Messiah actually came. Because that's the technique. That's what they do with this meter, is they give you a timeline, because you have to remember the syllables anyway, so we're going to make it more useful and meaningful to you. So in Isaiah 52:3-2, in his timeline, that was at who? Manasseh. And what did Manasseh do? Manasseh's evil was so great that he defiled the temple, putting male cult prostitutes in there. And so what God did is he said, hi, because Israel followed Manasseh and Manasseh did this, the temple's going down. The first temple. Precedence, legal precedence, temple going down. Warning, Bill Robinson. Apostasy, Bill Robinson. Isaiah 53:2 is warning about apostasy. Even as, back in Psalm 90, verse 7 was talking about, we end our years with consternation at you, yeah. And that's why Isaiah 53:2 also pegged Psalm 90, verse 7, at its own 53:2, because that's what Manasseh was doing at the time. He had just been jailed by the Assyrians, as God put him in jail by the Assyrians for all the wickedness he had done to the temple, which all Israel agreed to. So Paul, in Ephesians 1:6, at the first clause, is turning the tables and saying, hi, we're still down here, into him, and per his own delight, in his own will and purpose, resulting in praise to the glory of his grace. That's in about the center of your screen. In other words, temple building. The temple got torn down. Israel rejected Christ when he came. We are in the same situation as Manasseh. Israel's being, as it were, imprisoned. So all of that, is that just going to end with a sigh? Is that going to just end with consternation? No, it's going to result in the praise to the glory of his grace. So that's where he tied to Isaiah, and that's where he stops. This is really the most important thing I can say. He stops tying to Isaiah 53 at this point. That's like, I don't want to put this, a cliffhanger. You'll notice that when he was tying to Psalm 90, he goes all the way through to Psalm 90 verse 13 and then stops there. In Psalm 90 verse 13, was, when will you return, O God? That's what Psalm 90 verse 13 says. And he stops there. Cliffhanger. And he answers it in Ephesians 1:10. Upper right-hand corner of your screen, sort of in the center, really, to result in the filling up of time dispensation. That's the answer to what Moses was asking in Psalm 90:13. But at Isaiah 53, he stopped tagging it at Isaiah 53:2, which was ending at Manasseh's going into jail. Manasseh would get restored, but that's in Isaiah 53:3 in its first two clauses, but Paul doesn't track it that far. Okay, why? Because church is inserted. Isaiah 53:2 and Isaiah 53:1 were 56 syllables long, and started out in Isaiah 53:1, who's believed our report? To whom revealed the arm of the Lord? And in Isaiah's history tracking, as hopefully you've seen now, he's talking about the time he was talking to Hezekiah. Hezekiah's son was Manasseh. Hezekiah was, generally speaking, a good guy, but he was kind of foolish at times. And Manasseh was a thoroughly bad guy. So 56 syllables later, when Manasseh is 56, well, he's actually not 56, he's like 49. Okay, that's when he gets taken, or 42, I think he's 42. He gets taken by the Assyrians, and then he repents, and yeah, he was 42. He prays to God. I think he was 42. And just like Hezekiah was, he's going to get restored, and he has 15 more years of life. All right? But Paul isn't tracking that far. He's not tracking to the outcome. He's only tracking to the jailing in Isaiah 53:2. So it's a cliffhanger. You see how much more you can get out of what Paul means when he says, because, look, it says, resulting in praise to the glory of his grace. Well, what does that mean? You know how many verses sound like that in the Bible? So how do we know that this means anything special? You know it because of the meter. That being in jail, that being on earth, that being with Israel being in diaspora, that's going to result in praise to the glory of his grace, which of course obviously means that we're going to glory in him, that it's going to be happiness for us. Because really the ultimate happiness is to glorify him. God doesn't need to be glorified by us. We need it. It's a happy thing. Life is not worth living if it just isn't. Otherwise, the happiest life you'll ever have is when you can live it glorifying God in your mind. You're constantly thinking how great he is. That's happiness. There's nothing like it. I don't care if you mention anything you want in this world, it means nothing compared to being able to look at God and just exult in him. And so that's the praise of the glory of his grace. That's what we want to do. That's how we think. God doesn't need praise. And he's already glory. So we're not adding anything to him. We're not serving him. We're not buying him anything. We're getting something. So that's why he said, Aise painon doxis tis charitos autu. That's what we're doing in our souls. Instead of sighing. And we're groaning down here because the world is ruled by a Manasseh. But it's going to have a good ending. But it ain't over yet. So that's why Paul, lower right-hand side of the screen now, see the yellow highlighting? So that's why Paul only references the ending of the pregnant part of the ending of Daniel's prayer. Daniel 9:13. Now Daniel 9:13 is at syllable 434. At a point where Daniel, and I'm going to cover this in future videos, Daniel basically in the meter goes through Israel's whole history just like Isaiah does. Isaiah started it at David, and so Daniel's going to start it at David. You can't see this in the English, okay? He's doing it through the meter. And he starts with David's reign in Daniel 9:6. It's a 40-syllable verse. And he's using the syllables to characterize what he says out loud is characterized underneath by reference to the meter for each period of Israel's kings and how she failed during each of those epochs. So when he gets to verse 13, 9:13, he's come full circle to his own capture in 607 BC, which brought him where he is in his prayer. And Paul is playing to that. Israel was in diaspora when Daniel prayed, Daniel 9:13. The temple was down. It's a 62-week number. 434 is 62 times 7, which hopefully you've seen me cover by now what that means. 364 years the temple was standing, and then there would have to be a 70-year voting period attached to it, which I'm going to cover again in future videos when I go through Daniel's prayer, because his math here is completely genius and astonishing. And you will not understand Daniel 9:24 and 25, which talks about the 62 weeks in English even, if you don't understand why Daniel metered his prayer at Daniel 9:13 at 434. But Paul knows that, because Paul can read Hebrew. And he meters to that Hebrew in Ephesians 1, which right up here is ending at, let me just enlarge it now so you can see it. See this? Hello? See this? 434. Let me make it even bigger so you can see it. Whoops, so that's a little too big. 434, see? 434. 434. See, let's not make it quite so big. Okay? 434, see? And see this? That's 91 syllables. The whole section doesn't divide by 7 until it gets to 91. And it ends at 434 syllables. Well, what's this 91 about? I don't remember you talking about 91 right now. Yeah, I didn't. Not much. 91 is the number of sabbatical years in a 560 unit. Do you remember what 560 is? Like 56? 560 is a 490 plus the 70-year voting period, just like 434 in Daniel 9:24 and 25 rather, is a 364-year piece, corresponding to the number of years the temple was standing between 950 BC and 586 BC, plus 70 years. Okay, well, see, since Daniel closed his prayer, or closed his own, came full circle in his own timeline to 434, and since 62 weeks is part of the answer, the last part of the answer, when Christ is supposed to come, the 62 weeks plus the 7 sevens that preceded it, okay, so that's the 69th week when he dies, or there's the 69 weeks after he dies, and it's really after he dies. Well, 434, I better mention that here, because you know what? The last week of Daniel 9 had not yet played by the time Paul writes. So Paul is referencing the number of sabbatical years in a 560 unit, because it's still necessary to vote. And you might remember that Moses, at the end of Psalm 90, verses 16 and 17, totaled what? 56 syllables, which is what? 14 short, which is what? The number of years Israel is still short at the time Paul writes, right here, when Christ would have been 56 years old. You're beginning to get the idea that there's a lot more to this Ephesians 1 prayer than you thought there was? I mean, when the glorious God the Father, the Lord and Master Jesus, blessing us with every spiritual blessing. I've heard that in church 1,000 times, and I've gone to sleep 1,000 times when I've heard it. Yeah. And you're not voting, are you? Because you don't even know that's what he's talking about. See, he elected us. Okay, so now it's our turn to vote. See, we had to be elected in order to elect. We have to elect whether we want to learn Bible or not. Just like Israel had to vote to not work during her sabbatical years. Yeah, and remember Ephesians is the precursor to the book of Hebrews, which Paul did not write. Paul was dead then. That's Hebrews 13:23. Okay, Timothy had been released, which means Timothy had gone to see Paul. Paul got executed, and it was the year of the 4 emperors, so Timothy was released. Okay, but in book of Hebrews, chapter 3, there remains a day of rest. Yeah, the Sabbath is every day. Remember when the Lord said that? The Lord is the Lord of the Sabbath. Every day is supposed to be Sabbath rest now. So every day you vote to study, to learn. And Christianity has been voting what? We'll go to sleep now. We feel holy because we heard this verse, and we heard the priest, or we heard the minister. So give us our Bible portion for the day, and I count myself a good person because I went to church and I sing rah rah Jesus songs, and I made a little gift into the collection plate. So I'm a good person. God's supposed to bless me. Yeah, he's going to bless you with a flood if you're not voting. 56, warning Bill Robinson. Vote Bill Robinson. Israel's 14 years short, and so can we be. And that's why Paul ends Ephesians 1. Verse 14 at 434, not 490. Because it ain't over. That fat lady hadn't sung yet. And that's why in Ephesians 1:15 through 23, he's going to be praying the church complete. And that's why it hasn't completed until yet. This one is down payment on this inheritance of ours into redemption of us. He's redeeming us as his possession. That's how it ought to be translated. Resulting in praise for his glory. And it's 91 syllables corresponding to the number of sabbatical, aka voting years, in a 560-year unit. Which you will see more about when we start talking about Daniel. Coming up next.